Have you ever wondered what would happen if one day you were no longer afraid to be alone? No longer afraid of silence, no longer afraid of the judging eyes of the world, no longer afraid of the thoughts in your own mind? Maybe what you're avoiding is the very thing that could set you free. And this video will show you why. In a world where everyone is trying to be seen, to be heard, and to be validated, a rare kind of power is found in the opposite. In silence, in solitude, and in the ability to stand alone. But what makes the person who dares to face themselves become unshakable? The answer lies here. Have you ever felt restless when you're completely alone? No more voices in conversation, no more phones buzzing with notifications, no more distractions pulling your attention away, just silence. A silence so profound it feels like a void, and you want to jump up and fill it with something, a song, a movie, or just endless scrolling through your screen. But why does that stillness make us so uneasy? The truth is, most people are not afraid of loneliness itself. They're afraid of what it reveals. When the noise of the outside world fades, the only thing left is you, your neglected thoughts, your unspoken fears, the lingering regrets that were never addressed, the dreams you once had, now just faint echoes drifting through your mind. And because of all that, most people turn their backs on being alone. They don't face it, they run from it. But what if I told you that being alone is not a curse, but a gift, a power that when fully embraced can transform how you think, how you see yourself, and how you live your life. It may sound simple, but the truth is very few people dare to sit still long enough to experience it. And if you stay through to the end of this video, you'll uncover something the majority of the world has never realized. Solitude is not weakness, it is the birthplace of true strength. So why are we so afraid of solitude? The answer might go all the way back to childhood. From a young age, we were taught that being alone meant something was wrong. You had no one to play with, you were left out, you didn't get invited, you were isolated. From the beginning, being alone was associated with rejection. And as we grew up, society reinforced the idea that happiness comes from being surrounded by others. The media, social platforms, they all repeat the same message. Happiness is being liked, followed, and praised. And if you don't have that, you're not enough. We've been programmed to believe that being alone equals failure, but that's a lie. One of the scariest things for many people is not the absence of others, but the full presence of themselves in a room. When you sit alone, with no one to talk to and no sound to fill the space, you start hearing your inner voice more clearly. And for many, that is too frightening to face. But it's in that very moment when you begin to turn inward that you find the key to mastering your life. Not the kind of strength built in a gym or bank account or social status, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are, from understanding what you truly want and where you're willing to go. Ask yourself, how can you truly know yourself if you've never given yourself the chance to be alone? If you're always caught up in conversations, entertainment, busy schedules, how can you hear what your own soul is trying to say? It is in the quiet that true awareness begins to take shape. When nothing distracts you anymore, you start facing the things you never dared to confront. Forgotten dreams, suppressed emotions, questions you pushed aside because you had no time. And it is precisely in those seemingly lonely moments that you begin to see the deepest parts of your soul with clarity. From ambition to fear, from weaknesses to potentials that had never been unlocked. At first you might feel uneasy. You might even ask yourself, who am I when there is no one around me? But the longer you sit in stillness, the more you realize that solitude is not an absence, it is the profound presence of your true self. And that presence holds immense power. Most people have never stepped into that place because they are afraid of what they might uncover. Afraid to realize they have lived too long according to others' expectations. Afraid to face the truth that they don't really know what they want. And that is why so many feel lost in life. Not because they lack goals, but because they have never truly paused to listen to their own minds. They confuse solitude with loneliness, but the two are entirely different. Loneliness is when you lack connection. It's when you feel left behind. But solitude is when you choose to be with yourself. It's when you are fully present in your own space. You are not pulled by others' gazes or words. You are not influenced by comparison or judgment. In solitude, you are not controlled. You are free. And that is why the greatest minds in history never feared being alone. They embraced silence as an essential part of creation. They understood that in those peaceful moments, the greatest ideas are born. That's where inventions emerge. That's where the deepest thoughts take root. That is where a person truly begins to grow. When you learn how to be alone, you gain something most people never touch: spiritual independence. You no longer need anyone to feel worthy. You don't need praise, approval, or an audience to believe in yourself. You are no longer bound by what others think of you. Because once you've sat quietly with yourself, you've already faced the hardest thing. And you know what? The person who can be comfortable alone is the strongest person of all. Because that person is free. Free from expectations, free from pressure, free from the need for acceptance. And what is the reward of embracing solitude? It's waking up in the morning not worried about what anyone will think of you. It's being able to stand in the middle of the world and still keep your inner peace. It's walking your own path without constantly looking back for validation. Imagine a day when you feel complete within yourself. You don't need someone to tell you that you're good enough. You don't need compliments to feel joy. You don't need a companion to feel steady. It's not a cold feeling, it's a feeling of release. Lightness, like you finally dropped all the invisible burdens society once placed on your shoulders. And that is the strength that solitude gives you. It is not a negative state, as many believe. It is a journey back to yourself. A journey that teaches you emotional mastery, value recognition, and inner strength. It is something most people will never experience because they constantly choose to run from silence. They fear facing what's inside. They turn to noise, to crowds, and to meaningless things just to avoid sitting down and listening to themselves. But if you have the courage to walk that path, you will unlock something extraordinary. You will begin to develop a mind that cannot be shaken, a strength that no one can take from you, because it doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. It doesn't depend on your circumstances, but on how you face the silence. And when you do that, you'll no longer need the world's approval, because you'll already have the approval of your own heart. We've just talked about how mastering solitude is the first step toward discovering your inner power. And now, it's time to go even deeper. Because what you're about to realize may completely change the way you see being alone. Most people don't realize how much noise surrounds them every single day. The endless chatter, the constant news, the seemingly harmless conversations that slowly drain their energy. And so they drift through life, pulled in every direction, reacting to the flow without ever stopping to hear the one voice that matters most, their own. But when you are alone, something almost magical happens. That noise begins to fade. The distractions slowly fall away. And for the first time in a long while, you can finally hear your true thoughts. Clear, unfiltered, untouched by the words of others. This is when the mind begins to awaken. Like a forest after the rain, everything feels fresh. Solitude gives you a rare space to think more deeply, to ask yourself questions you usually don't have time to consider. Where am I going? What do I truly want? Is there something I'm doing just for others, not for myself? When you enter that quiet space, your mind begins to reorganize itself. The emotions you've suppressed, the desires you've neglected, the fears you've tried to ignore, and even the strength you didn't know you had. You begin to notice patterns in your life, repeated behaviors, decisions driven by fear, things you keep doing without ever understanding why. That's why so many people fear solitude. Because when you're in that silence, there's no one left to blame, no excuse to hide behind, no shield to protect you. There's only your awe and real. Facing yourself is never easy. But in that discomfort lies the beginning of strength. And yes, it can feel unsettling. It might make you feel vulnerable. It might expose insecurities you thought you had buried long ago. But remember this, those very truths hold the key to your freedom. If you are brave enough to sit with yourself, without running away, without seeking out noise to mask it, you're stepping closer to something most people will never touch: pure clarity. Pause for a moment and think about the most important decisions in your life. Did they come in moments of chaos, or in moments of true stillness and reflection? Most turning points, most awakenings don't emerge from noise. They come when you step away from the world, when you allow yourself to think deeply, when you listen to yourself without interruption. Sadly, most people never allow themselves to experience that. They are too busy, too distracted, too anxious. They choose distraction over clarity, comfort over truth. And because of that, they live on the surface, reacting to life instead of shaping it. But what about those who embrace solitude? They rise. They begin to master their thoughts. In silence, the mind doesn't just rest, it sharpens. It becomes more focused, more directed, more powerful. And once you've trained your mind in solitude, you become far less vulnerable to manipulation. You're no longer swayed by criticism, by attack, by the expectations of others. You know who you are. And you don't need to prove it to anyone. Most people live their whole lives without truly knowing themselves. They go to work, they connect with others, they strive to become someone. But they never stop to ask, am I living my own life? They are driven by habits, by societal pressure, by the desire to be seen. And in the end, they become a reflection of the world around them rather than an honest expression of who they truly are. But if you are truly alone, no, just physically, but in a state of mind detached from external influence, something miraculous begins to happen. You start to see yourself more clearly than ever before. No more masks, no more roles to play. Solitude becomes the most honest mirror reflecting who you really are. And in that mirror, you begin to see all the things you've been avoiding, the things you didn't do out of fear, the dreams you buried, the moments that truly stir your heart. At first, it might make you feel lost. Questions will strike like lightning in a clear sky. Who am I, if not the role I've been playing? What do I truly want, if not what others expect of me? Am I really living an authentic life? These questions, though they may sound intimidating, are the essential beginning of any real transformation. Because only when you dare to face yourself can you begin to build a life of honesty, a life that isn't controlled, a life that isn't manipulated, a life that no longer seeks constant validation. You begin to live for yourself freely and fully. And yet, most people never dare to do that. They fear doubt. They fear emptiness. They fear the truth about what they haven't done. So they keep filling their time with busyness, with surface level connections, with noise that numbs the mind. And just like that, they continue to drift further away from themselves. Meanwhile, those who choose to embrace solitude grow stronger with each passing day. They understand themselves not because they are perfect, but because they are honest. They no longer need someone to define who they are because they already know that truth deep within. And once you reach that state, the outside world can no longer easily shake you. You don't need anyone to tell you that you are worthy. You don't need a crowd to feel valuable. You don't need applause to believe you're on the right path. Because you've looked into the mirror of solitude and seen something few people ever dare to face, your true self. Now, let's go even deeper into the miracle that unfolds when you truly dare to step into silence and remain there. Because once the noise fades, solitude begins to strip away every layer of disguise you've ever worn. It peels back illusions, assumptions, and the stories you've told yourself for years. And when all of that disappears, only one thing remains: the truth. The truth about who you are. That truth may leave you stunned. It tells you that you are stronger than you ever believed, that you are capable of more than you've ever imagined. But you will never touch that potential unless you are willing to sit down in silence and truly listen to yourself. When you are no longer afraid of solitude, you open the door to an entirely new realm, a different dimension where you begin to uncover what has been dormant in your mind for far too long. And it is precisely at that moment that a shift occurs. Your life begins to change, no because of something external, but because you finally begin to look within. While most people live on the surface of life, reacting out of habit, moving like machines, constantly in motion without ever stopping to ask, why am I doing this? Those who choose solitude begin to explore what lies beneath. They are not swept away by the current of life. They pause, they observe, and they reflect. Because the truth is, most of us are caught in distraction, moving from one conversation to another, from one busyness to the next task. And in the midst of all that spinning, very few ever stop to ask, where am I going? Do I really want to live like this? Am I being honest with myself? But when you are alone, something very different happens. There is no one pulling you in another direction. No noise to drown out your thoughts. Your mind begins to shift into deeper territory. And that is exactly where true wisdom is cultivated. It is where new ideas are born, where intuition speaks, where small breakthroughs quietly begin to ignite. The longer you sit in the silence, the clearer things become. The tangled flow of thought starts to slow down. New connections between scattered fragments begin to form. You see solutions that used to be hidden behind the noise. You begin to understand not only the outer world more clearly, but also yourself on a deeper level. Your desires become more defined. Priorities begin to realign. The things that once made you feel like you had to have or had to do suddenly fade into the background. In their place appears a path, your path, slowly revealing itself. And instead of following the crowd, you begin to carve out your own unique, meaningful journey. Unfortunately, most people never experience this. They fear silence so much that they fill every empty space with meaningless noise. A television running all day though no one is watching. A playlist always playing so they don't have to hear the voice within. A conversation that never ends just to avoid the question, what do I truly want? But it is not because they lack capability. It is not because they are not intelligent. It is simply because they lack time alone with their own minds. They are so busy chasing the world that they forget to pause and ask, am I living the life I truly want? Every great idea, every powerful breakthrough, every life-changing decision does not come from noise. It comes from solitude. Every invention, every masterpiece, every awakening in history began with someone brave enough to sit down, alone, and think. Because when you embrace solitude, you don't just find silence. You unlock the greatest potential of your mind. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. You step out of a life driven by habit and into a life shaped by design. And it all begins with one simple habit, deep thinking. And when you can sustain deep thinking in a world full of distraction, you will no longer be controlled by what is shallow. That is where true power begins to take form. Most people rely on others to regulate their emotions. They seek validation, reassurance, and praise. When they feel empty, they rush to find someone to fill the void. A phone call, a message, a meetup. But what happens when there's no one left? What happens when you are forced to sit with your emotions and no one comes to rescue you? It is in that moment that you begin to build a completely different kind of strength, emotional strength, a strength that cannot be born in the crowd. It can only be nurtured in solitude. When no one lifts you up, when no one helps you forget, when no one says everything will be okay, you are left with no choice but to face it all. At first, it is uncomfortable. Suppressed emotions rise to the surface: fear, pain, anger, regret. But instead of running away, this time you stay. You sit with the sadness. You don't avoid the insecurity. You feel it. And then you understand it. And the moment you accept your emotions, instead of fighting them, you begin to transform. Because emotions are not the enemy. They are teachers. They reveal what is still wounded, what needs healing. And solitude forces you to listen. It teaches you how to be resilient, how to endure, and most importantly, how to control yourself. You learn how to stand strong, even when no one stands with you. You build a mind that does not easily crumble under pressure. This is the kind of strength most people never touch, simply because they are too busy avoiding the discomfort of being alone. They cling to others like a lifeline, hoping to escape the battle within. But true confidence does not come from the hands of others. It comes from you. From knowing that even if no one lifts you up, you can still rise. Even if no one recognizes you, you still know your worth. Even if no one believes in you, you don't doubt yourself. And that is the most unshakable confidence you can ever have. Once you master solitude, you master yourself. You no longer need others to feel complete. You no longer fear being alone, because you understand that being alone does not mean being empty. It means being in control. It means mastery. And once you reach that level of emotional strength, nothing can easily break you again, and that is still not the end. Because there's another layer of strength waiting for you to uncover when you not only accept silence, but begin to use it as a tool, as an advantage to rise above the crowd. When you begin to feel the power of solitude, you'll realize that it is in silence where something magical begins to happen. In a world that never stops talking, where everyone rushes to speak up and prove themselves, the person who can sit in silence is the one who truly holds the advantage. Because it is in that silence that you begin to hear the most important thing of all, your inner voice. no longer clouded by outside opinions, no longer distracted by noisy voices. You begin to hear your true thoughts. The thoughts you once ignored, the emotions you once suppressed, all start to surface. You begin to feel the things you used to avoid, the emotions pushed aside because you were too busy or too afraid. And then, something remarkable happens. You start to hear your inner voice, the voice of your true self. Silence is no longer an empty void, it becomes a space for clarity. It is a clear mirror reflecting everything you've been hiding. Ask yourself a simple question. When was the last time you truly sat in silence? No notification sounds, no background music, no conversations to fill the gap. Just you and your most honest thoughts. If even thinking about that makes you uneasy, then perhaps you're running from yourself. And that is exactly why you need silence more than ever. Because that is where wisdom begins to take root. Great inventions, profound ideas, life-changing realizations, all are born in silence. Not in applause, but in unnoticed stillness. When you learn to sit in silence without feeling the urge to do something, you learn to think before you react. You learn to observe before you speak. And in that process, you begin to build what the modern world is slowly losing: patience, discipline, and the ability to control your own mind. Most people fear silence because they fear facing what's unresolved within. They cling to external noise because their inner world is still chaotic. But those who learn to sit in silence without anxiety become unstoppable. They don't waste words, they don't crave applause. They listen more, understand deeper, and see things others never notice. Silence is not weakness, it is mastery. And only those who dare to sit with themselves, without needing anyone beside them, will understand the true power of silence. Because the noisy world out there will never comprehend how far a quiet mind can go. Many people still confuse being alone with loneliness. They believe that if no one is beside them, then something must be missing. That being alone is a sign of emptiness, of sadness, of being abandoned. But that is a serious misunderstanding. Loneliness is when you feel the need for someone to fill an inner void, when you rely on someone else's presence to feel worthy. But being alone is a powerful choice. It doesn't come from lack, but from inner fullness. It doesn't arise from need, but from intention. A person who is alone is not alone because no one wants to be with them, but because they have learned to enjoy their own company. They don't seek crowds to validate who they are. They use their quiet time to reflect, to grow, to train their mind and emotions. That is when solitude is no longer a burden but becomes a precious gift. The difference between loneliness and solitude lies in mindset. A weak mind fears being alone because it hasn't learned self-reliance. But a strong mind sees solitude as an opportunity to focus, to recalibrate, to rise above without needing anyone else. Think about the strong people, the steady individuals you've known. Do they constantly cling to noise to feel safe? Or do they radiate a quiet confidence even in absolute silence? Truly strong people don't run away from solitude, they embrace it, because they are not afraid to look directly into their own minds. When you shift your perspective, being alone no longer feels like isolation, but instead becomes freedom. You don't need others to feel complete. You no longer crave recognition because you realize that everything you need is already within you. And once that truth is fully understood, you will never feel lonely again. Many people believe that confidence comes from external validation, praise, or attention. But that kind of confidence is fragile. It can disappear with a single doubtful glance or a harsh comment. Real confidence doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. And it is built in solitude. When you spend time alone, without distractions, without being shaped or directed by anyone else, something powerful begins to happen. You stop looking to the world to tell you who you are. You stop waiting for permission to be yourself. You start to uncover your true worth, the worth that cannot be measured or decided by others. Confidence isn't about being the loudest in the room or proving that you're better than others. It's about knowing deep in your core that you don't need recognition to feel strong, you don't need approval to take a step forward. And the only path to reach that level is by sitting with yourself, in silence, and listening to what truly rises from within. Most people never get to this point. They are afraid of what they might hear when no one else is around. They are afraid of their own thoughts. So they surround themselves with noise, with compliments, with meaningless conversations, anything to drown out the insecurity inside. But those who dare to face solitude develop a different kind of confidence. A confidence that cannot be shaken by public opinion. A confidence that doesn't rely on anyone's feedback. They don't beg for approval. They don't strive to please. They lead because they first learned to lead themselves. And that's the moment when you no longer need the world to tell you that you are enough, because you already know you are. Once you've learned how to be alone and feel whole in your own presence, the next thing you'll discover is trust. Not trust in others, but a deep trust in yourself. Because when there's no one left to tell you what to do, no one nodding in agreement or soothing your insecurities, you begin to turn inward and learn to listen to yourself. You begin to make decisions without hesitation. You no longer wait for confirmation. You don't need anyone to assure you that you're right. You begin to walk into every situation in life with a quiet but unshakable strength. Because you know who you are, you know what matters to you, and nothing can move that. This is what true confidence looks like. A kind of confidence that doesn't come from admiring eyes or loud applause. It comes from a deep understanding and acceptance of oneself. This kind of confidence is rare, because most people are searching for it in the wrong places. They look outward, seeking validation, chasing the crowd, hoping someone else will recognize their worth. But those who truly embrace solitude take the opposite path. They don't ask for permission to be themselves. They don't wait for acceptance. They lead instead of follow. And once you build this kind of confidence, no one can take it from you, because it isn't built on anyone's words or presence. It is forged in silence. In those moments when you dare to sit alone with your doubts and overcome them with willpower and awareness. Sadly, most people never reach their true potential. Not because they lack intelligence, talent, or opportunity, but because they are constantly distracted. They spend their entire lives caught in noise, chasing meaningless things, shaping themselves around others' expectations. And in that process, they lose themselves without even realizing it. But solitude changes everything. When you are alone, you finally have space to look inward, to grow, to improve your weaknesses, to evolve into a better version of yourself. It is the most valuable time you can ever give yourself. Think about it. Every skill you've ever mastered, every turning point in your life came when you had uninterrupted time to focus. The most successful people in history understood this. Whether they were artists, inventors, or leaders, they were never afraid to separate themselves from the crowd. On the contrary, they sought solitude because they knew that in silence, the greatest creations are born. When you are alone, you are free to explore your passions. You can think without being interrupted. You are free to try, fail, and try again without fear of judgment. You can pour all of your energy into your goals without being redirected by other people's opinions. That is a kind of freedom only solitude can offer. But most people don't choose that path. They fill their lives with empty relationships, easy entertainment, and a desire to be admired. They spend their energy on the outside world and abandon the potential within themselves. They're afraid of facing who they are, so they never discover who they could become. On the other hand, those who embrace solitude are different. They use their alone time to sharpen skills, build discipline, and create value. They don't need noise to feel alive. They don't need approval to move forward. They quietly lay down solid foundations in silence. And when they re-enter the world, people can sense something different in them. A strength that is not easily shaken. That is why solitude is not a weakness. It is a gateway. A path that leads you to self-mastery, to your true greatness, to a version of yourself you can be proud of. A version most of the world never has the patience to become. And once you step onto that path, your life will never be the same. Because while most people allow the world to shape their thinking, you are learning how to think for yourself. While they absorb opinions, chase trends, and react without reflection, you are building the power of independent thought. You are no longer a product of noise. You are the master of your own mind. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. Sitting with yourself without a phone, without background music, without anyone to talk to, is a challenge. You might feel restless, anxious, even tempted to walk away. But if you stay with it, if you are patient enough to push through, you will reach a new level of power. That is what we call mental discipline. That discipline is the foundation of resilience. It is what separates the weak from the strong. Most people never develop it because they've never given themselves the chance to train it. They rely on the constant stimulation of the external world just to feel normal. But those who have mastered solitude are different. They build a mind that cannot be broken. They spend time in silence to train their focus and to gain control over their emotions. They stop reacting impulsively and begin thinking clearly. They become tough, ready to face challenges without falling apart. They don't need the world to agree with them before they take action. They don't need anyone to pull them out of a dark thought, because they've practiced how to walk out of it themselves, from the inside. If you can sit alone without feeling the urge to keep yourself busy, without rushing to find distraction, you are already stronger than most of the world. Because mental strength is not born in parties, it is not built in noisy crowds, it is trained in silence. And once you gain control over your mind, nothing can control you. No one can throw you off course. Nothing can break you down. Most people live under an invisible dependency. They need someone to lift their energy, someone else to validate their worth. But you are different. You've learned the lesson of self-reliance. You don't wait for someone to lift you up when you're down. You don't need anyone to push you when you lose motivation. You don't wait for someone to show you the path, because you've learned how to walk it on your own. It's just you. And the truth is, you alone are enough to start building something no one else can ever destroy. But what happens when you start living from that power every single day? When you make solitude the foundation of every decision, every action, every relationship in your life, and once you've begun the journey of facing yourself, you may realize one thing. At first, it's not easy at all. Solitude can make people feel confused, even scared. You might feel lost, like walking through a vast room with no exit. You may question yourself, wondering if you're on the wrong path. But then, as you gradually accept being alone, something miraculous happens. You discover you don't need anyone else to prove your worth. You no longer depend on external encouragement to take action. You don't wait for someone to tell you that you're good enough, capable enough, worthy enough. You become your own source of strength. And that is one of the most important turning points in your spiritual maturity. This is the mindset of truly powerful individuals. They don't wait for others to inspire them. They don't need applause to feel worthy. They don't wait to be given permission to act. They decide, they move. And when others leave, they don't collapse or fall apart, because they never built themselves on someone else's foundation. They built themselves from within. Many people never reach that level, not because they lack the ability, but because they're too afraid to be alone. Afraid of silence, afraid of emptiness, afraid of hearing the real voice inside them. They cling to relationships, to packed schedules, to phones, social media, music, anything that keeps them from having to listen to themselves. But those who dare to face solitude are the ones who become unstoppable. Because once you learn how to rely on yourself, you will never have to depend on anyone again. You won't be shaken by someone's presence or absence. You won't need someone else to be the power source that lights you up. You become your own light. Most people are easily influenced. A single criticism can destroy their confidence. A judging look can make them shrink. Their most important choices don't come from within, but are shaped by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being different, fear of standing alone. But those who embrace solitude are different. They no longer live under the control of temporary emotions or other people's opinions. They become untouchable. It doesn't mean they never feel pain, but they don't let pain control them. They have trained their minds to be steady, to stand still in the storm without being swept away. When you spend time alone, you gradually detach yourself from the invisible control of the outside world. You are no longer bound by the need for recognition. You no longer feel the need to be seen in order to feel valuable. The things that most people relentlessly chase, fame, attention, approval, you realize they are all illusions. They hold no real power unless you give them permission. Solitude teaches you how to stand firm in your true self. Whether someone likes you or not, you remain who you are. Even when rejected, you don't lose your identity, because you don't define yourself through the eyes of others. You develop an inner stability that no criticism, failure, or setback can shake. That is why strong people are not afraid of being alone. They don't see solitude as punishment, but as a tool. They use it as a furnace to forge their minds. Every moment alone becomes a brick they lay down to build a mental foundation so strong that nothing can break it. Think of the people who are the hardest to manipulate. The ones who remain grounded no matter what you say or do. The ones who don't need to please anyone, who don't follow the crowd, who don't lose themselves just to be liked. These are the people who are no longer defined by the world. They don't live to be accepted. They know who they are, and that makes them incredibly powerful. When you truly learn how to be alone, you no longer feel the need to fit in at all costs. You no longer need to explain why you live differently. You don't have to bend yourself just to make others comfortable. You realize your value doesn't come from how many people applaud you, but from how firmly you stand within your own soul. And when you reach that level, you become unshakable. Not because you're defiant, but because you clearly know what matters. You've sat in silence long enough to filter out what's false. You don't need noise to feel alive because you found strength in quiet. Most people live in a state of reaction. The moment they open their eyes, they're swept into the chaos of the outside world: notifications, news, rumors, opinions, anxiety. They're being controlled without even realizing it. Their time is no longer their own. Their energy is drained by things that offer no real value. Their minds have no space to breathe, constantly filled with the noise of the world. But solitude changes everything. When you accept being alone, you reclaim control. You take back the right to decide how your time will be used. Your attention is no longer yanked in every direction. You learn to prioritize what truly matters. You learn to filter. You begin to clearly distinguish between what needs to be done and what is only draining you without giving anything in return. When you are no longer pulled thin by demands and distractions, you begin to think more clearly. You act with intention. Every step is guided by a clear purpose, not just an automatic reaction. And that sense of ownership is what separates successful people from everyone else. Successful people do not let others decide how they use their time. They guard their energy like it's a precious asset. They don't let the world's noise dictate their choices. They know exactly where they're going and why they're going there. This is the power that solitude gives you. It forces you to take responsibility. It demands honesty with yourself. It pushes you to focus on what truly matters. It eliminates the distractions that steer you off course. And it helps you move towards your goals with sharp, unwavering clarity. And when you begin to live with that clarity, you enter a completely different state. A state that most people have never experienced. A state where you not only master your mind, but also begin to master your entire life. We've seen that when you dare to be alone, you stop living on autopilot. You start living with purpose, with clear direction. And that shift unlocks a kind of power that very few people ever gain in their lifetime. The truth is, most people don't live by choice. They live by reaction. They are pulled by circumstances, guided by noise, and slowly lose the ability to steer their own lives. They don't realize that each day slips by in a series of repeated reactions. A message makes them angry. A comment brings them down. An opinion changes their direction. And just like that, their entire life becomes a chain of reactions to the world, not the creation of their own inner world. But those who embrace solitude are different. They don't get swept up in that current. They don't wait to be led. They lead. They don't sit back to see how life unfolds. They become the force that shapes it. Because once you truly master being alone, you no longer seek validation. You no longer need someone else's approval to take action. You don't live to please. You live to be honest with yourself. There's a false belief that many people carry throughout their lives, that strength only exists when you're surrounded, that you must be encircled by friends, by a community, by relationships in order to have value, and because of that belief, they avoid solitude as if it's a punishment. But they fail to see the truth. True strength is not forged in crowds. It doesn't grow in the noise. It is shaped in stillness. It is nourished in discipline. And it shines only when no one is watching. When you embrace solitude, you step into a territory that most people never dare to enter. You do what many find terrifying, because there you can't pretend. You can't hide behind busyness to avoid your feelings. You can't rely on others to keep you distracted. There, it's just you. You and the weaknesses you've avoided. You and the doubts about your capabilities. You and the insecurities that have quietly haunted you. But the beautiful thing is you no longer run from them. You choose to work with them. You learn to be patient with yourself. You learn to observe your own mind. And day by day, you begin to develop resilience. You no longer wait for someone to lift you up because you've learned how to stand on your own. You don't fall apart when you're rejected because you understand your worth doesn't depend on applause. You don't need someone to remind you that you're enough because you already believe that from within. The weak seek distraction. They need noise to forget their fears. They need company to avoid feeling empty. They need a packed schedule to escape facing themselves. But the strong welcome discomfort. They understand that it's within discomfort that truth emerges. They sit with it. They listen to the emotions rising to the surface. They look fear in the face and refuse to look away. They confront the darkness in their mind, and from it they draw out light. They turn isolation into sharp focus. They turn time alone into an opportunity to build discipline, to set plans, to examine themselves honestly. Every silent moment becomes a training ground for the mind. No one sees them during this phase. There are no spotlights, no applause, but it is in those unseen hours that a completely new version of themselves is taking shape. And when they return to the world, people can feel the difference. They don't have to say much. They don't have to show off. Their very presence carries a different kind of energy, a calmness, a quiet confidence, a sense of control that comes from within, because they know who they are. They've built themselves not on the foundation of external validation, but on the certainty of their own truth. That is why loneliness should not be feared. It is not the enemy, but the teacher. It is the doorway that leads you back to yourself. Because once you learn how to stand alone, you will discover what you've been searching for your entire life. True freedom. Freedom from the need to be liked. Freedom from the fear of being misunderstood. Freedom from having to live according to someone else's standards. And when you begin to live in that freedom, your life starts to change. You are no longer afraid of silence because you have learned to listen. You no longer crave validation because you have already validated yourself. You no longer depend on anyone to feel strong because you have built that strength in moments when no one was watching. But perhaps the sad truth is that most people will never reach that kind of strength. They will keep chasing noise, keep seeking distractions, keep filling the emptiness inside with temporary things. They fear silence as if it were a storm. They fear hearing the voice within. And because of that, they never get to know who they truly have the potential to become. But those who have learned to master solitude, they no longer belong to the majority. They step forward. They rise above the chaos of the world. Their minds are steady like a rock in the middle of a storm. They do not need others to agree with them. They do not need anyone to walk beside them. They are not afraid of rejection because they are not begging for acceptance. They are not afraid of failure because they have learned how to rise on their own. They are no longer afraid of being alone because now they understand that being alone is not emptiness, it is wholeness. This world does not truly belong to the loudest voices. It belongs to those who can walk alone, untouched by the noise around them. Those who do not bow to judgment, who do not waver at opinions, who are not clouded by the crowd. And once you step into that kind of power, nothing can stop you.